Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Drill Podcast. I'm Mykel Rochman, that's Dean Bruce, and today we are talking about the edge rushing class and linebackers here for the 2025 NFL Draft. Before we dive into any of it, though, Dean Bruce, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I was pleasantly excited about this class. I think pretty much all the guys we're going to talk about today are going to be in that sort of day 2 to day 1 range. So hopefully we get a good feel on the top 100 prospects of the class.
Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting class and one that I think has plenty of potential when it comes to just how many guys are really on the table to be one of the top guys off the board when it comes to the 2025 NFL Draft in April. Without further ado, I mean, we got 16 guys that we're going to go through, 10 edge rushers, 6 linebackers. So we need to speed this up a little bit. Let's start with number 10, and that is Patrick Payton, a guy that you had as your 8th ranked edge rusher, a guy that I had as my 10th. And the guy that we've already seen for this college football season, he played in week 0 against Georgia Tech. Wasn't the greatest performance for the Florida State Seminoles, especially on the defensive side of things. But overall, when evaluating Patrick Payton, what were your thoughts in his game?
Yeah, I mean, for better or for worse, we've gotten a taste of what Patrick Payton looks like this season, but a lot of the tape I evaluated was based on last season. Last season, he seemed really agile and twitchy. He had a good enough strength profile to coast off of that. Like he was able to get some pushback on blockers. I thought he was pretty good with hand placement. He attacked blockers square in the chest and then was able to move laterally around them, but he always kind of consistently struggled to convert that speed to actual power, and he never really won consistently strength battles. Like anytime a guard or a tackle was using power against him, I felt like he lost his balance pretty quickly and kind of was thrown off base. But he had good quickness, he had good agility, some good twitchiness. But yesterday, or not yesterday, a couple days ago against Georgia Tech, it looked like the athleticism wasn't even a factor against that team. I worry that if these are guys who are supposed to be the top end of offensive linemen in the college football landscape, where Brent Key's like an offensive lineman specialist, I worry that Peyton's not going to be really able to hold up against NFL offensive talent. Before this season, I sort of comped him to Arden Key and sort of like being that agile, twitchy guy who's good at pass rushing, but really kind of rough in the run stopping game. I don't know what he's going to look like this year. Probably going to swing around bottom of day 2 if I had to guess.
Yeah, and it's important not to overreact to one game. Obviously, Georgia Tech, it wasn't the greatest performance for that Seminoles front seven, but we've seen units have like pretty bad opening starts to the season, and then they bounce back, especially as prospects. I mean, you look at a team that played Florida State, LSU last year, guys like Mason Smith and all the other pieces that were on that defensive line, Jordan Jefferson. I mean, there's just countless guys that were kind of being dismissed as prospects because of that struggle against Florida State, and eventually they kind of rebuilt their draft stock and showed that they had what it took, and they got drafted in that day 3, late day 2 type of range. And, Patrick Payton, I think, is someone that's going to be somewhat of a pass rush type of guy, probably better in a 3-4. I think he has some traits and some potential to be a run stuffer, but I don't know, 6'5, 255. He looks a lot lighter. He looks like he could definitely add some weight to his frame. And I think maybe that aspect of his game will come. But I think right now what you're looking for is just that speed and that length off the edge. And he was able to convert that, especially more consistently, working opposite Jared Verse, where a lot of the attention went that way. But I don't know. Now he's the premier pass rusher, and I think he needs to prove that he can kind of make that same type of impact that he showed last season more consistently and enough if he wants to remain as one of the top edge rushers in this class.
Totally agree. I think Georgia Tech was sort of an early test for him. If he can recover from that, he'll probably be back into that sort of like second round conversation. If he can't, we might see him floating around closer to the bottom of the day 2 range. But he's still got that length and he's building up his frame. So it's good looks.
Yes. So now moving forward to our next ranked edge rusher, and who we have on the board for you is Jack Sawyer, the edge rusher out of Ohio State, a guy that is part of a intriguing tandem with JT Tuimoloau. But what were your thoughts on Sawyer when checking him out? Because you're a little bit lower on him than I am.
Yeah, I just kind of thought he was really behind the rest of his like NCAA contemporaries in terms of technical skill. I felt like he was a very good run defender and a very good athlete, but I think immediately you're coming in and you're looking at a guy who's a bit of a developmental project. Now, I think his most recent game, his bowl game, he had a really good run. I think he racked up a couple sacks in that game, but he was very much for a while in that season he was coasting on those athletic traits, and he just I felt like he wasn't using his arms as much as he could. Like he was sort of a shoulder bump and run type of edge rusher. But if he can pick it up from like he was doing in the bowl game, I felt like when he was playing when he was playing in the bowl game, he was he was doing better about using like a rip move and a chop move and stuff like that. But I think it's gonna be this season's gonna be big for him. He's still a younger prospect, I think. Like, I mean, this is going to be his senior year, but when he was playing Missouri, I felt like that was his best tape he'd shown so far. And it's good to have your best tape at the end of your season because it shows you've got stuff to build off of. But if he returns to sort of that regular season form of being kind of a bump and run type of edge rusher, which is not particularly a phrase you use with edge rushers, more of a corner thing, but it felt like that was how I'd describe his play. And he develops some pass rush moves. If he keeps that up alongside his run defense, he could be a very strong defensive talent for an NFL team. But I worry that that's not going to be the case. But I know you were bigger on him, so I'd love to know what you thought.
Yeah, I think the big part of it is I had a similar evaluation, but I'm more trusting in NFL coaching and development to kind of figure out the technical side of things. I think the power, frame, and natural size and strength is just there to where he's continuously kind of making an impact. I was most impressed when watching Notre Dame, actually, when he was operating against Blake Fisher, another guy that is heading to the NFL now this season. And I felt like there was a lot of plays where he was consistently either making an impact or giving trouble to Fisher, to where I'm kind of intrigued with what he can do off the edge. I think the power frame and just overall base strength is there to where I trust him as a run defender. Obviously, the production has improved from year to year, but it's a little bit skewed because of that 3-sack performance in the bowl game. But I mean, this is a guy that I think has everything you're kind of looking for in the edge rushing department. It's just now trying to get that tool set and overall hand usage improved upon. And I feel like we've just consistently seen it where guys kind of head into the NFL with a lot less refinement on their game, but you get them with a well-versed defensive coach and someone's going to figure it out for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the profile is all there. Just it's in terms of like prospect ranking, I think a lot of these guys that we're talking about have it figured out in the hands game and Sawyer's not quite there. But if you're building an edge rusher, I wouldn't be surprised if you went with a frame like Sawyer.
Yeah, and another guy that's looking to kind of similarly take that next step in their skill set. We're going with Ethan Burke out of Texas, our 8th ranked edge rusher. And this is a guy that, is part of a very exciting Longhorns defense and now is looking to kind of take on that lead role. But that edge department with Barron Sorrell and Trey Moore is going to be very exciting. You had him ranked as your 6th ranked edge rusher. I had him at number 9. What were your thoughts when watching Burke, and what are your expectations for the 2024 season?
I mean, my expectations are continued growth. I mean, he had a pretty good season last year. I think he was hovering around 5 sacks. Big, long, speedy guy. He's 6'6", 265, I think. He developed into a solid edge with a big time athletic four at Texas. I was doing some background research on him. I saw he's a lacrosse player. Makes sense. Really fast, great long strides. I think that it also kind of makes sense that he's sort of a two-sport athlete who wasn't putting all his focus on football because it still seems like he's learning the position, but he has a club move that I really like to see. I think he's really learned from lacrosse to encourage the contact and embrace the contact and break down arm engagement and get towards the quarterback. I felt like his pressure conversion rate was pretty good. He's got a really good nose for the ball carrier. I think he's carrying a lot of those instincts in well from his previous career as a lacrosse player, and he's carrying it in well as an edge rusher. I mean, he was doing two-sport skills, but I think a lot of his stuff translates. I like to see guys who have like translatable skills from other sports, and I felt like that appealed to me with Ethan Burke. I'm a little worried about like just general development in terms of like getting a little. Even though he's like 260, I would like to see him a little more muscly in the frame. I think he's not all the way filled out yet, which there's still time. I think it's going to be a little difficult for him to make a ton of statistical waves with a Texas front seven that is as stacked as it is. We mentioned Barron Sorrell earlier and Trey Moore. I think those guys are going to be really big time edge rushers as well in the college level. So I think it's going to be difficult for him to get like as high sack numbers as some of the other guys on this list, but I think he's gonna long as he can show growth in terms of like putting together a couple more moves and going in with a better pass rusher plan, I think Burke will be a guy we're talking about next year.
Yeah, and I think my big question for Burke is there's games where you'll turn on Texas and it's clear that this is someone that is making great impact and is just wreaking havoc on the backfield. But then there's games where he kind of disappears. And I think that's the big question mark for him is how can that game to game consistency sort of show up to where he can kind of establish himself as a top edge rusher in the country. Now, obviously, he's getting a lot of attention from the offensive line and blocking protection, but I don't know. There's still like that next step that I want to see from him to where he can be a season-long impact player. And I think if he's able to unlock that, not only will he have a huge spark in his draft stock, but the Texas Longhorns will be great beneficiaries of that. And it will help them kind of take that next step as a defense where they've kind of struggled against the pass in recent seasons. And it's not necessarily all on the defensive line. Obviously, part of that's on the corners. But I do think that having that pass rush and that consistency to kind of get into the backfield and wreak havoc on opposing quarterbacks will help out the cornerbacks and help that pass protection sort of take that next step.
Yeah, I think if there's any year Texas's pass rush is going to be a top end unit, it's probably this one. There's a lot of potential there. It's just a matter of if they put it all together.
Yeah, so now moving forward to the next guy on our list, and we got Dani Dennis-Sutton, an edge rusher for Penn State, was operating as a backup last year because Penn State is just consistently churning out defensive players, especially at defensive end. What were your thoughts on watching Dani Dennis-Sutton this year, the 6'3", or no, he's 6'5", 270-pound defensive end?
Yeah, I mean he's a big guy, and I think what I saw from his rotational snaps was a pretty good bag of pass rush moves. And I thought he was very in control of his body. It always felt like he came in with a plan, which, he might have developed by sitting there on the bench for a little while the other Penn State edge rushers were taking their time. But I thought Dennis-Sutton was a guy I was keying into, and I was like, oh, if this guy gets some like time as a premier pass rusher. I mean, he's not going to be the premier pass rusher as Abdul Carter's also going to be there. So they're going to be sort of a tandem operating. But I think Dennis-Sutton is going to operate as more of the technician because he's coming into the Penn State defensive line with a full bag of moves. I thought he ripped well. I thought his just general body control was great. He is able to get around guys, move laterally, and even still push the pocket down. But I think I was a little worried about his run defense because I felt like his lower body just wasn't super strong. He occasionally lost his anchor and in turn his balance. I think he operates better as like a specialized pass rusher who's going to come in and really like, give offensive tackles some trouble in terms of like chopping at the hands and making sure that like engagement isn't so sucked in that they're like that he's not able to move. He's going to have to use his athletic like skills to, set up like a big statistical year. I thought he did pretty well in terms of stats for a guy who was getting rotational snaps, but I think this year he has to step it up and prove that, that Penn State defensive line is going to be the unit to reckon with this year in terms of like what's going on Penn State's team. I think that's the section of that team that they're looking to see big production from, at least like immediately. It jumps out to me as the best unit on that team.
Yeah, he's someone that, the size is already a great characteristic to have and something that'll easily make him an on-the-map type of prospect when it comes to the attention that he's getting from the league. I think he's really nice in terms of just overall power and play strength, and that's still going to develop as he continues to get more snaps and gets on the field more consistently. I do think the toolbox is something that needs to be worked on, but similar with Jack Sawyer, I mean, that's something that I think the NFL is going to have no trouble like kind of buying into and saying we can coach that up. When it comes to bend, I think that's where my biggest question mark is for him. And I think that's more consistent with some of the bigger defensive linemen. But I do expect a big year out of him. I think he's going to have a lot of clean up sacks. I think Abdul Carter is like an absolute stud. So I think there's going to be a lot of plays where he's sort of forcing the quarterback and play direction in Dani Dennis-Sutton's kind of general area. And that's going to result in him getting some boosted production as a result. And I think that'll be a nice way to sort of establish himself as an edge rusher and kind of get himself more notoriety when it comes to the overall edge rankings in this year. Yeah, I mean, Penn State's going to be in for a big season, and it wouldn't shock me even if Drew Aller doesn't necessarily take that next step as a passer. I think the defense is so good that there's real potential that this could be a playoff team just because of the fact that, like, the defense is the carrying unit, and then the offense has enough to where they can kind of match that production and match that play. Guys like Dani Dennis-Sutton and Abdul Carter, and then Kevin Winston, someone that I really like in the secondary. So, I mean, there's pieces for this team that I think are going to really kind of elevate the overall play. And Dani Dennis-Sutton is going to be a big-time contributor. Because he was a backup, I think a lot of people it's easy to kind of overlook that and what type of just caliber he is, but he's a very, very impressive.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if Penn State's challenging for the Big Ten this year alongside Ohio State. It might really be a big battle of those two premier pass rushing duos.
Yeah, so now moving forward to the next edge rusher on our list, and we have JT Tuimoloau, a guy that you had ranked at the number 4 spot. I had him at number 8. What were your thoughts on Tuimoloau, and what do you think he can do in this final season?
Yeah, I thought he was a pretty good run stopping edge, which was a trait I wasn't getting from a ton of guys, especially in the middle of my watch. I thought I thought both Ohio State defensive linemen were pretty good about stopping the run, which I thought was a pretty good skill. But I think Tuimoloau also moved laterally pretty well. He handled traffic really well. I thought was really nice. I felt like when I saw him working down past the tackle and he was getting to a second block by maybe a running back or a fullback or a tight end, he was still able to keep that speed up and have that straight line athleticism. I didn't think he was a crazy top end athlete personally. I thought his straight line athleticism, despite him being able to operate at that second level and not lose momentum, it wasn't a great start to begin with. I didn't see him as being very explosive, but I think at times you're just looking for an efficient pass rusher who is able to, get around these top end tackles and like work through them in any way he knows how. He's got a good strength profile behind him. I felt like he was able to convert his speed into power very well. I felt like he generated shock in the hands pretty decently and was able to disengage from like placement in the chest using that. And I thought his leverage was also very strong. I think that's part of what you get from guys who are good run stoppers and good edge setters is that they're always going to be able to find leverage and make sure that they're working into the offensive lineman's chest. And I felt like I noticed that with JT. I'm excited for his year. I think he'll probably have a good year alongside Jack Sawyer. I think Ohio State's defensive line is going to be a really difficult team to rush against. So I think if Denzel Burke can be a marquee corner, that team is just going to be very difficult to have a competent offense against, thanks to the D line working with those cornerback units.
Yeah, and if you're looking for the big 3-4 type of edge rusher, I think Tuimoloau is just the perfect fit. That Kyle Van Noy, Jelani Tavai type of player. So just expect him to be drafted by the Lions eventually. Go to the Patriots and just find a success. But I don't know. This is someone that I really like his play instincts, and I think his versatility is really impressive. He's someone that can operate in the open field, kind of work around to the sideline, and still kind of cover range pretty well. I agree with you. He's probably not a top end athlete, but I think he's just consistently sort of steady in terms of production and development and just his play-to-play performance, where I trust him against the run, against the pass. It doesn't really matter the circumstance. I think he's someone that you're going to want on the field. I think he's really intriguing, 6'4", 270 pounds, but he's someone that, it wouldn't shock me if this is a guy that's getting linebacker reps in the NFL and is still like kind of producing and doing well with that. So I don't know. He's someone that holds his ground against the run, puts up about like 5 sacks on the season, and he's more steady with his sack production. Whereas Sawyer obviously had that 3-sack performance to end it off to pass him in the ranks. But I don't know. I don't think Tuimoloau is going to necessarily be a guy that's ever going to be talked about as like, oh, he's going to be the first pick in the draft. He has all the traits. He has all this explosiveness and this potential. But I think he's going to be steady in that day 2 type of range. And he's going to be someone that you kind of count on to work in the NFL, so long as he kind of lands with the right coaching situation. Because I probably would have said the same about like Xander Collins for Arizona or prior to Arizona, but I don't love Vance. So I don't know. There's potential here as long as Vance Joseph stays away from him.
Yeah, Collins has had kind of a rough go at it, but I think you're definitely right. He's kind of a scheme specific guy that if you can put him in the right spot, I think his floor is very strong.
Yeah, so now moving forward to our next guy on the list. And we have Abdul Carter, the edge rusher who was playing linebacker for the Penn State Nittany Lions. We already talked about Dani Dennis-Sutton, but this might be the guy that, could easily kind of fly up boards. I have him ranked as my number 2 edge rusher. Dean has him at number 9. So a little bit of discrepancy in our overall view of him, but I'll let you go ahead and take it away with your thoughts on Abdul Carter, and then I'll give everyone the right opinion to have.
It's not even that I don't like Abdul Carter. I'm just like worried about him. I think I have this like issue where I like get lost in the sauce with guys who are switching their positions over. He's played a lot of linebacker over his career at Penn State, and the athletic traits are really there. I think he's going to garner a lot of these Micah Parsons comparisons, and some of it's helmet scouting, but also some of it's just how that guy transitioned into the NFL. Um, I don't think he's quite as strong as Micah Parsons is, but I think he has that kind of potential. Just that floor is pretty low because he's got limited reps at the edge position, even though he was just a beast as a blitzer at the linebacker spot for Penn State. I think having him win on strength is still going to be a major question mark. I felt like at times he was getting pushed around when he was operating down the middle as a downhill blitzer. But if he can, I've seen that he's bulked up a little this year. I think he's up to like 250-ish, maybe high 245s range last I checked.
Apparently 6'3", 260.
260. Oh damn. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's putting weight on. So it wouldn't shock me if he's completely eliminated those strength concerns by the time of next year. But I'm doing evaluations based on last year's tape, and I'm a little worried projection wise, but I think that added weight is really going to help him like find a spot on the edge and continue it. And I think he can really develop into a strong edge rusher if he can keep that athleticism up. But I think it's just a matter of time for me to really jump on the Abdul Carter train like you have.
Yeah, so for me, whenever I'm watching them, obviously there's not a ton of pass rush reps, but I think there's such hip flexibility and just that explosiveness in short range to where I see him getting around blockers pretty effectively. He worked against the interior mostly as a blitzer because there were so many guys on the edge for the Nittany Lions last year. But I think when he's getting more opportunities around the edge, he's going to be able to take advantage of that space because working in the trenches, you're obviously trying to generate your space through traffic and find ways to kind of get to the quarterback in between like 300-pound linemen on the interior that are all kind of bunched up. But if you're getting that space on the outside to kind of attack around the corner and edge to where you're really kind of utilizing your bend and your hip flexibility to attack the quarterback and attack the football, I think that's where Abdul Carter is going to find his ability and really kind of put himself on the map as a top prospect in this class. He's got great length, great size, great range, great ability, and I think that hybrid versatility is going to end up being beneficial for his long-term projection. I don't know. I just think that the overall quickness in his hips and the flexibility in his hips to kind of bend around the edge is going to kind of continue to evolve and is going to kind of establish himself as a top edge rusher in this class. And I think a lot of these other guys, they have maybe that bend and athleticism, but they aren't necessarily to the level of a guy like Carter. And that's why I'm so bought into him. And I think for guys that do have that bend, they don't necessarily have that same play strength and ability on the edge that Carter's kind of gotten from playing linebacker and handling the second level blocks from offensive linemen. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on Carter. And I think he's going to be a guy that could easily be a top guy in this class when it's all said and done. But obviously a little bit of projection there. So I don't hate the idea of being a little bit more reserved in your outlook for him.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of time for me. I always get antsy in the summer scouting phase about these guys who are changing position, but if he can hold on to that play strength and athleticism at that frame, it wouldn't shock me if I'm up there on him next time, like about 6 months from now.
So now moving forward, we have our next edge rusher in the rankings, and that is Ashton Gillotte, a guy that you have at number 5. I have at number 5 as well. And, I think when watching him, he's just the epitome of consistency. He's one of the guys that actually gave Joe Alt probably the most trouble last year, which I think will consistently be referred to because Joe Alt was this like great, polished offensive line prospect for many. But Gillotte, I think, has the ability that's both force as a pass rusher and just that ground breaking like stability as a run defender to where he's just not giving up anything in his lanes. And I think that's such a great, dependable factor to have as a prospect. Louisville has really taken huge strides as a defense. And last year, it was because of Gillotte. I mean, there's other great pieces on that defense, but Gillotte was a star, consistently making great moments happen for that Cardinals team. What were your thoughts on watching Gillotte this season?
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, I thought he was a very steady, consistent player, very athletic for a 270 pounder, but I also felt like if he really wanted to, or if a team wanted him to, he could flex over to defensive tackle because he was that stout of a run defender. He's a good run stopper. He holds his anchor well. I also watched the Notre Dame game. I thought he gave Joel a hard time. I think he was pretty consistent about giving these tackles a hard time. It shows in that pass rush production. He's one of the few guys that's still in this class that had double digit sacks last year. I believe he was ranked in the top 5 in sacks in the NCAA last year. It's honestly a little harder to gauge on what the NFL feels about him because he hasn't come out despite this incredible production. I honestly don't know what's keeping him back, Gillotte, because it seemed like last year I was all excited for him to come out and be like a second rounder type guy, and he just didn't, even though he had 11 and a half sacks. But he has good moves. He just needs a little bit of a better anchor, and I think even though his sack production was really strong, I still would like him to get a little better about open field tackling and maybe even open field movement. I think he does a lot of great athletic stuff going downhill, but when he's out in space and trying to capture guys like who are already have a lot of motion behind them, already have a lot of power in the heels when they're running forward, I think he has a little bit of trouble. But I think ultimately Gillotte is going to be a guy who we're talking about in day 2 this year because it's finally his time to come out, and I think Louisville's done a lot to support him on the defensive line and give him a chance to be his best self and a wreck on either the outside as an edge rusher or on the interior where he sometimes flexes to DT.
Yeah, and sometimes guys just feel the need to bet on themselves to get into that first round range. Obviously, we have him as both have us at fifth, but he ended up fourth in our rankings. But I don't know. This is someone that I think is just so steady that it wouldn't shock me if he's just like, man, I do it all. So I don't really see any doubt of like returning, doing it again, and just establishing myself as the top edge rusher in this class, where I can go in that first round discussion. But I don't know. It's someone that I don't have a lot of like questions about his game. It's just I don't see as much like potential. So in the summer, it's very easy to kind of have rose tinted glasses for some of these other guys and be like, oh yeah, James Pearce is going to be amazing. Mykel Williams is going to be amazing. Like Abdul Carter is going to be amazing. And then just kind of have Gillotte sort of be like, oh yeah, like I know what he is. And I think that's almost discrediting like just a young guy that does it all isn't necessarily low potential. But yeah, I mean, I think he's very consistent. I have no doubts about his ability to contribute at the NFL level. But yeah, I would admit that I'm probably giving a little bit more of a nod to the potential guys that are maybe missing a few aspects of their game. Where if they were as good as Gillotte in that department, I'd be like, let's go. They took that step. So I don't know. He's kind of suffering from just the upside factor of summer scouting.
I feel you. I feel you. It's hard to resist.
Yeah, so now moving forward to our third ranked edge rusher, and that is James Pearce Jr., a guy that, I mean, potential off the roof. And I think as a pass rusher, he does it all for the Tennessee Volunteers. He is just so bendy on the outside. He has pretty nice size, 6'4, 245 pounds, but obviously he's very thin, especially in his lower half. Against the run, that's the big question mark for him because you want to see him kind of take those steps forward when it comes to holding down his lanes, being able to run defend consistently from play to play to where you can leave him on the field on all downs. I think he's going to be similar to a guy like Brian Burns, where that pass rush ability and that bendiness on the outside is so easy to notice. It's so hard not to buy into. But at the same time, you kind of need guys that can contribute at a high level in both factors if you're going to kind of talk about them as the first overall pick, like people have done for Pearce. I think he's more of a mid first round guy. Still not discrediting what he can do because in the right scheme, as like a 3-4 pass rusher, or maybe a 4-3 guy that you're kind of depending on more in the pass rush department, I think he's an absolute stud. It's just, when finding that role for him, it's important that you're asking him to do what he can and not like putting him in bad situations where he's set up to fail.
Yeah, I totally agree. Deeply athletic guy, very explosive, really quick, and I thought he was pretty strong at the point of attack for a guy who's 243 pounds. But again, it's strong for a guy that's 243 pounds, not strong as an NFL edge rusher. I was impressed by how much power he was carrying in his body, but I wasn't super like, oh, this guy's going to be moving offensive tackles. I think he is definitely a pass rush, like special type guy, like guy who's going to be great at the pass rush coming out and just needs more time to develop that run defense. I sort of was reminded of Chop Robinson in that way with a really fast first step and then a pretty solid set of like explosive skills in getting the pass rush. But I think Chop and James Pearce Jr. have the same issues of not really having run defense, and just not really carrying themselves well in the lower body department. And I think despite having those explosive traits that show signs that there is power that can be generated in those legs, I think Pearce needs to bulk up down there, especially, and like find a way to set an anchor, find a way to set the edge, find a way not to be blown off of his spot in the run defense game. And I think especially it's going to be a test against these SEC running backs like Trevor Etienne's moving over to Georgia. Trying to think, Montrell Johnson's going to be there. So I think we're going to be a little like worried about these types of guys who are very powerful, very like strong, able to lower the shoulder against Pearce and how they bounce off of him. I think he's going to have some trouble against those guys again this year if he doesn't have some time off in the offseason to bulk up those lower body skills and sort of set the edge better and get some work in on run defense. I think again, he's probably a top 20 guy, but you got to let him do what he's willing to do, like he's able to do right now, which is, pass rush, get tons of sacks, and, really light a fire in that pass rush, and maybe let some of the other guys on the Tennessee defensive line do the work in the defensive tackle game. I know we talked about a very solid Tennessee defensive tackle yesterday who could give him some of the support.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a guy that, I mean, you put him in like that Tampa Bay defense, he's going to be a great fit because he's going to be playing a little bit off ball, working that Todd Bowles system where you're kind of generating pass rush and blitzing the defense or the quarterback consistently. I thought he had pretty nice leverage, and it kind of helped his play strength a little bit. He was able to spear blockers really well to where he kind of pushed them back and get them into the backfield, collapse the pocket. But yeah, it's just that next step of kind of evolving as a more dependable and more sturdy defender against the run that will kind of help him elevate his stock. And if he's able to do that, I mean, maybe we could have that discussion about him being a top pick in this draft, but it's still just, I think, kind of far away to where it's hard to make that projection for him without feeling like you're almost doing too much lifting on the potential side versus his actual play and film product. Now we enter into the top two, and our number 2 edge rusher is Nick Scourton, a guy that was at Purdue last season, transferred to Texas A&M. Dean, this is your top-ranked edge rusher. He is my number 4 ranked edge rusher, a guy that has intriguing size at 6'4", listed 280 pounds, maybe a little bit lighter, we'll see, but you know that A&M defense loves to beef up their interior defense or their defensive linemen, so it'll be intriguing to see. But what were your thoughts on Scourton and what has him as your number 1 edge rushing prospect?
Yeah, I mean, I like the big body edge rushers. I think he's one of those guys who specializes in power and is incredibly strong at the point of attack. When he gets his hands out, he's knocking guys back 2 steps pretty consistently at Purdue. He was an absolute game wrecker. And he's also incredibly flexible for a guy who measures in at 280 pounds. I just didn't see many flaws with his game either. I felt like he had a good bag of moves sitting around in his repertoire. He was successful at both portions of the game in pass rush. He was able to get a pretty good amount of sacks and able to get pressures on the quarterback and make him move in the pocket and really like sort of force the guy to either extend plays or just blow them up entirely and force throwaways or still get these big sack burst, what am I thinking of? Long loss plays. And in run defense, since he has that 6'4", 280 size, he was able to handle interior rushers and set the edge really well. He anchored down well. He moved his feet very strong. He just always had good leg drive on his side. It felt like his leverage was always working. He kept his balance well. I liked Scourton because I didn't see a lot of flaw in his game. I didn't see a lot of stuff where I was like, oh, this is something he really needs to fix for the next level. Maybe I would like to see him have a little bit more athleticism if he cuts weight, if he's dropping down below 280 pounds. It would be nice to see him add a little extra speed on top of that to make up for the lost weight. But I'm not 100% sure that'll happen. I think Texas A&M likes to have those big bodied guys. So we'll just have to see sort of where that goes in the NFL. I've been burned on these 280-pound power rushers before with Texas A&M. Wouldn't shock me if it happens again, but I'm pretty confident in Scourton's game. I didn't see a lot of holes early, and I don't expect a lot of holes to develop as he moves to the SEC level. I felt like he was manhandling guys well enough at Purdue that the SEC is going to be a cakewalk for him.
Yeah, I think he had some issues in terms of just playing himself out of the play. Like he has a little bit of just like over pursuit, but I think that comes with the skill set. And I think it's something that the NFL will be able to kind of iron out. This is someone that I think is similar to a lot of these other edge rushers where we're like, man, there's so many traits here that you can just like fall in love with. That's easy to buy into the potential, but the production is there as well, which makes it so much easier to be like, yeah, Scourton's a top guy in this class. I think in terms of just overall projection, that defensive end kind of like edge rushing or 5 tech, 3 tech, whatever you're kind of operating him in. I think he's going to get some snaps at all spots, but I think it kind of limits him in terms of just like that ability to kind of work as a free defender on the edge, and maybe that could kind of hold back his production. And I think at Texas A&M it's going to be intriguing to see him kind of take that Shamar Turner kind of role in this defense. But I don't know, this guy has a lot of violence in his play, and it's so intriguing to watch him kind of just jolt offensive linemen back and just be able to penetrate the pocket, whether it's collapsing the pocket and generating pressure or getting to the quarterback and laying a hit on the passer. So I think he's in for an exciting year. I don't expect the production to fall off too much. I think he's a guy that could easily kind of fall in any of these spots in this edge rushing rank. These top 4 guys for me are all kind of similar in terms of tier. So it's just now kind of seeing this 2024 season to really stack them up compared to one another.
Yeah, I think Elko is going to be a good defensive-minded coach for him. I think he does a lot of good work. He did a lot of good work with defensive linemen of his caliber at Duke, and I think Scourton has a good guy on his side.
Yeah, so now moving to our top ranked edge rusher, and that is Mykel Williams, the edge rusher out of Georgia, 6'5, 265 pounds. A guy that is playing in the 4-3 defense consistently, just getting off of the edge. Shows nice power, shows nice ability. Kind of in that Trayvon Walker mold of just that, like everything you want out of him. I think the toolbox is still definitely a work in progress. The hand usage and just getting off of the engagement is going to be something that needs to develop in his game. But I think the just aspects of his game that comes whenever it comes to that run defense, that ability to generate power and push his blocker back, the ability to kind of work his way to the football consistently through traffic as a run defender. He does it all in that regard. And that Georgia defense is obviously going to be dominant year in and year out. Mykel Williams is the headliner for that juggernaut defense. What are your expectations for Williams in 2024, and where do you think he could realistically end up in this draft?
I think he's probably pretty much locked in as a top 10 guy currently if he keeps up the pace that Georgia defense tends to set for their edge rushers. I mean, if we're talking about Trayvon Walker comparisons, I totally agree. I think he has that strong open field athleticism. He's a very good mover, but he also has Trayvon Walker's explosiveness and strong hands, and he's a little more polished than I think Walker was coming out in terms of handling pass rush and run stopping. He's not he's not necessarily better as far as like size goes. I think Trayvon Walker is a bit of a unicorn in that area, but Mykel Williams makes up for it by bending around the corner, but is still being able to be stout and setting that edge. I agree. I think his hand placement and to an extent leverage could be a little bit better polished up at the next level. I think that's going to be something he needs to work on this year and at the NFL level. But as far as those traits you can't teach in terms of like size, weight, movement skill, and like explosion, Mykel Williams kind of checks every box. I think we're looking at a guy who I fully expect to be a top 10 prospect next year. It wouldn't shock me if he's number one. I think he's going to sort of settle in as the betting favorite maybe throughout the year at some point because of how strong that Georgia defensive line is and because he's the headline face of it. I think Williams has high potential to be a top tier guy for this edge class.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting debate to see which guy for the Georgia Bulldogs is off the board first between Carson Beck and Williams. But moving forward now to the linebacker position, and we have six that we're going to go over today. And the first one we're going to talk about is Lander Barton, the linebacker for Utah, the 6'3", 233-pound defender. Was playing pretty well last season, got hurt and missed some time before the use, but overall is entering 2024 with plenty of expectations. We both had him as our lowest ranked linebacker. Personally, for me, I thought the athleticism was there and the abilities to kind of like locate the football in space was nice, but the play awareness was just still kind of lacking in terms of anticipation, progressing with his routes, finding the run direction. That part of his game just still needs to kind of grow, and I think it resulted in too many issues where he was late getting to the football. The athleticism made up for it. He had some plays where he was working out of the slot because Utah was just so trustworthy of his ability to kind of track his man and work in coverage. I think he has a lot of great traits, but that processing and that mental game is so big at the linebacker position. I think it's something that kind of lacks for Barton's skill set.
Yeah, I think we definitely saw the same type of player. He's a guy who carries a lot of athleticism in that large frame. I mean, 6'4", 230, 233 is not nothing to sneeze at, but I totally agree that at times I felt like he was getting washed out of the play, not necessarily because he wasn't athletic enough or strong enough or not a good enough like build type football player, not because he wasn't big enough for the game, but because of his own mental like he's just a little bit behind the clock in terms of figuring out where the ball was going to go and where the carrier was going to take it. I felt like, especially on these plays where it was a option and it was either he was pulling left or pulling right, he often was choosing the wrong direction. I wasn't super happy with those diagnostic skills. I liked to see him make these long strides across the field and get sideline to sideline pretty well. And I also thought the fact that he could drop into slot was pretty like intriguing for a type of guy who maybe that means he can operate a little at safety as well if he needs to. Gives him some versatility. I don't know. In a league where it feels like linebacker is one of the positions where mentality is most important. Barton wasn't necessarily impressive in that area, but he's got a whole another year to work on that and become a better diagnostician and figure out the speed of the game and how he can better connect to getting to where the ball is and making the tackle at the right time and finding the right man to go off after. I think it's definitely possible that once he returns from injury, he comes back with a vengeance and we're still talking about him. But I think it's also possible he drops off the map entirely.
Yeah, Utah's in for a big season, and Barton's going to be a big part of that on the defensive side of things. But moving forward now to our fifth ranked linebacker, and that's Jalon Walker, a guy that is at Georgia, another school that we're kind of talking about twice today with these ranks. He's very exciting, 6'2", 245 pounds, worked as an edge rusher, worked in the linebacker unit for the Bulldogs, and I think now he's going to try to stick around in that linebacker area. This is someone that has that hybrid ability that I think is going to intrigue a lot of NFL teams, especially as they kind of look for just front seven contributors in multitude of ways. I think he's got some really nice short area quickness and that ability to kind of close in and pursue on the football to where he's going to make some plays consistently. It's just kind of sort of more projection right now, which kind of lowers him at a position like linebacker where a lot of guys are maybe more proven in that aspect in that area of the field. So I'm intrigued with what he has to offer, and I think there's plenty of skills to where he could easily fly up boards and be one of the top linebackers in this class. All these guys are pretty closely bunched together for me for these top five guys. So Walker's nothing that I'm dismissing in terms of skill set and ability. I just have him a little bit lower than some of these other top four guys.
Yeah, you almost wonder if the skill set he brings currently means he'd be worth moving out to edge at the next level because he is a very solid pass rusher, but he also has that crazy short area burst that you talked about earlier. I think he is very fast. He's a very strong athlete. I totally see why he's going to get some run at coverage linebacker. I felt like watching his tape, he was very much operating as a pass rusher for the most part. He wasn't doing a ton of coverage. It was a little hard to get a vibe on whether he had that in his toolbox, like consistently able to do those reps over and over again because his coverage snaps were very few and far between. I mean, not even questioning his motor, just baseline. I want to see more reps from him. I'm excited about him this year because I looked at him. I was like, this is a guy who could probably run in the 4.3 range if he really got down to it. Maybe probably low 4.4s, which was impressive for a guy who's coming in about 245 pounds. I mean, if at worst you're sticking him at outside linebacker, letting him rush the passer and cook him that way, I think he's going to find a role for himself with the skill set he currently has. I would like to see him do a little bit more coverage stuff so he can be a true hybrid and be able to sort of fit into any scheme he wants and not just ones that allow for pass rushing outside linebackers. I want to see him get opportunities that he hasn't maybe shown the skill set for yet in terms of like actual getting on the field and playing that role consistently, but has shown that he has the frame, speed, and lateral agility to take on at the next level. I think he's a high potential player, and it wouldn't shock me if we're putting him higher than I guess 5 at the end of the season.
Yeah, he's someone that I'm really excited about, and it wouldn't shock me if he's sort of like a Hassan Reddick, where maybe he enters the league as a linebacker, but eventually is sort of that stand-up pass rush specialist that is so good that you kind of have to consistently leave him in your defense, not just on passing downs. And maybe he ends up in Arizona. We'll see. But moving forward to linebacker 4, we're talking about Barrett Carter, the linebacker for Clemson, 6 foot, 234 pounds. It's a little bit undersized in terms of just like the overall length and ability, but I think he has some really nice moments. He's sort of dependable in that Clemson Tigers defense, and he's a star for that unit. He's great in the second level. I thought he was better than Jeremiah Trotter last year, who had a lot of hype and build up for his stock that sort of eventually came tumbling down after the testing. But I think Carter was the clear star for that second level of defense, and he has the ability to kind of work into contact. He does really well getting through traffic and locating the football and getting his pursuit to the game or to the ball and putting a stop on the play. He also did a really nice job of picking up short, shallow zones. I think he's someone that you want closer to the line of scrimmage. I don't think he's a stellar athlete either, but I don't think it's going to necessarily knock him down the boards, similar to how it did with Trotter. I think there's a little bit more there in terms of explosiveness and play on field that you can kind of see and put together to where you can really kind of depend on him to be a starting, dependable linebacker in the league as well. I think, especially when it comes to the projection to the NFL, a lot of guys are all in on these traits and length and the overall upside. But sometimes you just need that guy that you can kind of put into the trenches and really just see him kind of attack the football. And he's going to consistently sort of make plays, sort of in that Nick Bolton kind of mold. And I think Barrett Carter kind of has that in his tool bag.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I was maybe a little more impressed by the athleticism than you were, but I think playing next to Trotter, who's running 4.8s, will give you a little bit of a skewed idea of what the athleticism looks like. But I definitely thought he was able to carry decently fast running backs and tight ends in coverage well. And I also thought he moved downhill well enough to catch these running backs well, and he was a strong tackler. I think ultimately he was very dependable at finding the football and finding where it was going to go and being able to be in a position where he makes the play. I think he's just he has a very strong understanding of the game and where these plays are going to go. He has an understanding of, the instincts of a quarterback, the instincts of a running back. It felt like he was a very instinctual player. I would like to see him do a little bit better at taking on blockers at the next level, which I think is partially stymied because of his length and size. He's a little bit smaller in terms of weight and arm length than some of the other guys we've talked about today. But I think that ultimately sometimes it's just not as big of a deal in a guy's game. If you're looking for a linebacker who's going to operate more over the middle and able to be a guy who sort of roves that sort of shallow zone those type of concepts, I think Carter's going to fit in well on your team if you're looking for that type of guy. If you're looking for more of a Micah Parsons type, might want to look elsewhere. But Carter's always going to be a dependable guy who's out there looking for the football and ready to bring you a couple big plays every game.
Yeah, so now moving forward to our linebacker 3, and that is Sonny Styles, the safety convert for the Buckeyes. And I don't know, he's very exciting because he's 6'4", 240 pounds. So he already has linebacker size. But this is a guy that was getting time at strong safety, at cornerback, at linebacker, at edge rusher. Kind of sounds similar to the Isaiah Simmons mold, but I think there is a little bit more intrigue with him just kind of working in the modern day kind of defense with this Ohio State team. And I don't know. He has a lot of experience just working around the field, but also when he's playing through trenches and trying to operate against linemen, he shows that play strength and ability. The athleticism is clearly there, else he wouldn't have been playing so far back so consistently for this Buckeyes team. Now I think they're kind of keeping the trajectory in mind, his NFL prospects, and I think they want him close to the line of scrimmage, getting him to the football. Obviously, the transition to a more full-time role at linebacker is going to be leading to some questions that will need to be answered in 2024. But I'm really excited for Styles, and I think he has the play strength and just overall wow factor to do it. Now it's just sort of unlocking that ability. Again, Simmons kind of landed with Vance Joseph, a guy that we talked about earlier, and I feel like that hindered his overall potential in the league. Maybe that's giving too much credit to Simmons, but I think with the right landing spot, Styles can be similar type of hype and intrigue, but I think there's a better end result in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, well, Joseph just wasn't willing to get creative with him. Like I think Clemson was getting creative with him with Simmons at back when he was playing in 2019 range. I think Ohio State's already ahead of the game and sort of getting creative with Sonny Styles in terms of moving him down from safety to linebacker to edge and letting him sort of play at all kinds of levels of the defense, because he clearly has the frame and build to be able to set those things up, and especially those athletic traits. Watching him, he didn't look out of place next to Jack Sawyer in terms of like taking on pass rushers, at least for me personally. I think if you're willing to get creative with a guy like Sonny Styles and he lands with us in a spot where, like, chess piece type of play is encouraged, then I think there's going to be a space for those guys who can fill any role, and especially if he has the motor that Styles does. I felt like Styles getting some experience at the back end where he would have to rove around, move around a lot to make sure he's catching these guys and catch up with people deep is going to do him well in terms of building endurance and being able to play more snaps than maybe some other defenders because he's moving around the defensive unit a lot. But it also gives other people on the defense a chance to rest, and a guy like that who can play at multiple spots makes your whole defense better. So I'm hoping Styles can sort of do better than Simmons did, and people are willing to get more creative with him at the NFL level.
Yeah, plenty of upside. And that Buckeyes defense is filled with guys that you're going to want to watch this season. So he's an exciting player to keep an eye on. But moving forward to linebacker number 2, and that's Dani Stutsman, 6'4", 240 as well for the Oklahoma Sooners. A guy that's more of the traditional linebacker, but some great size, some great just playmaking ability that I think consistently makes it easy to notice him when watching the Oklahoma Sooners on Saturdays. He's a guy that consistently finds the ball, maybe has that more traditional sense to his play style, but I think the athleticism and the just consistency and dependability is going to continue to keep him afloat atop the rankings for this linebacker class. He returned to school. He was a guy that I think had a lot of hype as a maybe early day 3, maybe day 2 type of linebacker pick. Went back to the Sooners for another season, now helping them kind of transition to the SEC. This is someone that I think has a lot of potential as just like, the bruiser type. What are your thoughts on him, and what do you think he can be in the NFL?
Yeah, I totally agree that he's more of a traditional linebacker. I mean, like a lot of these linebackers we're looking towards the future with are these fast some more little guys that we're looking out for. And Stutsman is sort of a thumper in the mold of the guys from like the 2000s and 90s type of range. But I still think there's a place for a guy who has that kind of skill set, especially combined with Stutsman's mental ability. I felt like Stutsman was always keying into plays well, and he had a quick, clear reactiveness to his game. I felt like his translation from his movement, from his like brain to what ultimately became his movement, he was always finding the best path to the ball carrier, finding a way to get in front of the ball and, either slap it down or get near the receiver and bring the guy down before he got some extra runs after catch. I think occasionally I was a little worried about his play strength because sometimes he'll get bucked by a running back every once in a while. And just generally I think that if he can sort of stand his ground a little more and get a stronger tackling form on some of these guys, I think that'll be a beneficiary to Stutsman's game in the future. But I think ultimately Oklahoma is looking at a guy who, is going to be just smart enough to pick up any throw that any of the offenses they come up against toss at him. I think no matter what play, Stutsman's prepared for it, and I think that's going to be something that carries him higher into the rankings as we go forward. It's hard to test that kind of stuff, but it felt like, to me, Stutsman's mental game was very obvious on tape, and I'm excited to see it only grow as he returns to school for another year.
Yeah, not much question about his ability. Now it's just getting another year of tape and film on him. But I mean, very high floor. I don't see him really bottoming out like some of these other prospects maybe have potential to do. But moving forward to our top ranked linebacker, and that is Harold Perkins, a guy that entered the league or entered college football as an edge rusher for the LSU Tigers and just lit the world on fire, put himself on the map as a top player. Ended up moving to linebacker. Some people hated it, but it is better for his overall long term just projection to the NFL. 6 foot, 215 pounds. So you kind of have to compare him to like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, I guess. But I feel like Owusu-Koramoah was more like a defensive back that was like kind of big and sturdy, whereas Perkins obviously moving off of being an edge rusher, but still both guys very explosive. Perkins is extremely powerful for someone so small. I think that's something that a lot of people are obviously going to have questions about with his size, but I mean, he was knocking back blockers consistently at the point of attack. And I think this is something that in the NFL, when these linemen are kind of building up, moving to the second level, that's going to be the big question mark for them. But the play speed, the instincts, and just the overall playmaking ability is just so undeniable that I really don't have much in terms of questions for Perkins. I still want to see a little bit more in terms of coverage and just ability to kind of work with his weapons and show that he can do it in the open field more consistently. But I mean, this is a guy that I think it can do it all really for the Tigers and is in for another big season in 2024.
Totally agree. I think that edge rushing snap early on, the snaps he got at edge rusher early on in his career have really, transformed him into a total package when it comes to hit power and tackling. I think he just sort of lays the boom down well when it gets to getting guys in the open field. I think maybe he's not as strong of a tackler, but I think he is someone who generates a lot of shock when he actually connects. And his lateral movement's incredible. I think since he is that small, it allows him to, jump from sideline to sideline a little better. Um, and I think it's not totally translating to coverage just yet. But when it comes to run stopping and pass rushing as a weapon, I think Harold Perkins is incredible because he's able to move that fast downhill and he's still able to get skinny with it and get past these offensive guards and centers who are maybe like not prepared for the delayed blitz rush. And they're definitely not prepared for that kind of speed. There's constantly reps of Perkins moving downhill, getting right through the cinch of the two guys who are between him, and they aren't even ready to move back, and they just have to keep covering their guy and just hope Perkins isn't already got a sack in the backfield. I think as far as upside goes, there's not much better in this linebacker class than Harold Perkins. I'm a little concerned about that floor because he's so new to the position and it doesn't seem like the mental game is completely there like it is for some of the other players in this class, like a Barrett Carter or a Dennis-Sutton. But I think if he can, continue getting reps at the linebacker position, the sky's the limit for Harold Perkins because of that athleticism and because of that crazy hit power. I think there's stuff to be excited about with him. And I think, maybe that freshman season was really big for him and the sophomore season was a bit of a downgrade step, but a downgrade step from one of the best freshman seasons I've seen for a defender in my lifetime is nothing to sneeze at. If he can bring back up to the freshman season, sort of thinking of him like another LSU defender we've talked about in the past, Derek Stingley, that kind of career trajectory, even though they're completely different players at completely different positions. They both had crazy strong freshman years with a slight downturn in the sophomore year. If Perkins can stay healthy, and build on that game, I think the sky's the limit. We could be talking about him as a top 15 player, but I think that ceiling is very strong. GMs are going to be enticed by it.
Yeah, it's an exciting linebacker class, exciting edge class, and we've talked about the top guys. Next time you see us, we'll be talking about some of the biggest sleepers for this class at both positions, so keep an eye out for us. That's Dean Bruce. I'm Mykel Rochman, and that's the 2-minute drill. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Have a good one.